Have you ever been in a situation where someone assumed you didn't belong simply because of how you looked or the clothes you wore? Imagine boarding a plane, excited for an important meeting, only to be confronted by hostility you didn't expect. The seat you purchased, the one you have every right to occupy, is challenged, mocked, even threatened by someone who believes their privilege outweighs your humanity. Now, picture this. The person demanding you move is relentless, and the staff around you quietly encourage compromise. Do you stay silent? Do you step aside to avoid conflict? Or do you stand firm, knowing it might cost you more than just comfort? Michael Lawson faced that choice. Dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, he could have blended into the background. But something inside him refused to yield because this wasn't just about a seat. It was about dignity, respect, and saying no to a lifetime of being underestimated. As you watch, ask yourself, what would you do in his shoes? Would you have the courage to stand quietly yet firmly against bias? Could you turn humiliation into a moment that reshapes the rules, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been dismissed? Join us as we explore this extraordinary story of courage and justice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss a moment of this remarkable journey. The first-class cabin was unusually quiet that afternoon. Passengers were settling into their leather seats, scrolling through phones, tucking jackets into the overhead bins. The soft hum of the aircraft's ventilation filled the silence, almost like a whisper in the background. And then, cutting through the calm like a blade, came a voice sharp and unforgiving. Move out of this seat right now. Can't you read? This is first class, not some discount bus line. People like you don't belong here. Every head turned. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. It wasn't just the tone, it was the absolute certainty in her voice. The way she spat out people like you, as though she were stating a natural law. The speaker was Evelyn Pierce, mid-50s, pearl earrings, perfectly manicured nails. A woman who carried herself as though the cabin itself was designed for her comfort. She didn't look up from her phone at first, but when she finally did, her eyes scanned the man in front of her from head to toe. Michael Lawson stood there, boarding pass in hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of worn sneakers. No designer logos, no tailored suit, just comfort. He looked, at first glance, like any other traveler trying to make it through another long flight. But to Evelyn, that was enough. Enough to decide he didn't belong. "This is my seat," Michael said softly. His tone was calm, but there was steel underneath it. The kind of steel forged over years of swallowing insults and deciding which ones to let slide. He glanced at his boarding pass again, even though he knew it by heart. Seat 1A. Evelyn laughed under her breath. Not the kind of laugh born from humor, but the laugh of mockery, the kind that told everyone nearby exactly what she thought of him. 1A. I don't think so. I've flown this airline for 15 years. I'm a platinum member. I always request this seat. Clearly, there's been a mistake. Why don't you find another spot and let me be comfortable? The way she said, "let me be comfortable," wasn't a request. It was a decree. Around them. The cabin shifted. A man, 2 rows back, lowered his newspaper just enough to peek. A young woman across the aisle raised an eyebrow, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Others shifted in their seats, suddenly fascinated by the magazines in their laps or the notifications on their phones. It was the silence of people who knew something was wrong, but didn't want to be the first to get involved. Michael stood still, steadying his breathing. In the pit of his stomach, he felt the familiar knot of anger. He had been here before, in boardrooms where his competence was questioned, in hotels where his card was doubted, in restaurants where service came last, not first. He thought of his mother, years ago, clutching his small hand as an airline agent accused her of carrying forged tickets. He thought of the humiliation on her face as they were escorted out. He had promised himself then, one day, if it happened again, he would not be silent. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but carrying, "this is my seat. It is assigned to me, and I will not move." The quiet around them grew heavier. Evelyn tilted her chin higher, as though his refusal was an insult to her entire existence. "Look at you," she sneered, her eyes flicking to his hoodie. "In sneakers and a sweatshirt. When was the last time you even flew first class? Be honest, you people never sit up here without causing problems." The words "you people" landed like a gunshot. A few passengers gasped softly. A young man in row 3, Jamal Reed, pulled out his phone under the tray table and quietly hit Go Live. His camera captured Michael's steady face, Evelyn's smug expression, and the uncomfortable stillness of those around them. Within seconds, viewers began joining, comments rolling in. Some were shocked, some were furious, but inside the cabin, most stayed quiet. Michael gripped his boarding pass a little tighter. He thought again of his mother. He thought of every compromise he had ever made, every time he had been told to step aside, every time peace had meant swallowing dignity, and something inside him rose up. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, addressing her directly now, his tone respectful but edged with firmness. "I understand you've flown here many times, but today, this seat is mine, and I'm not moving." For the first time, Evelyn's smile faltered, just slightly. Then she leaned back, arms crossed, her voice loud enough for the rows behind her. "Unbelievable. Making such a fuss over one seat. Real first-class passengers don't behave like this. You're just trying to make a scene so the airline will compensate you. But it won't work with me." Passengers shifted again. Some shook their heads, some muttered under their breath. One woman whispered, "It's his seat. Why should he move?" But no one spoke loudly enough to change the balance. Not yet. And there, in the narrow aisle of first class, the stage was set. Evelyn Pierce, seated like royalty on a throne she believed belonged to her by birthright. Michael Lawson, standing calm, steady, unwilling to bend. The weight of two different Americas pressed against each other in silence, waiting to see which would break first. The silence in the cabin stretched, taut like a wire ready to snap. Michael remained still, boarding pass in hand, his voice echoing in the quiet aftermath of Evelyn Pierce's insults. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire row of first-class passengers had been turned into an audience, unwilling participants in a play they hadn't signed up for but couldn't look away from. Evelyn shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. She leaned forward just enough to emphasize her presence, her diamond bracelet catching the overhead light. "Listen," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I've been loyal to this airline for 15 years. Platinum status. My husband and I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars traveling every year. I always request this seat. It's practically mine. Do you understand? So why don't you save us all the trouble and move along?" Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "The boarding pass says otherwise. This seat was assigned to me. Mrs. Pierce, I'm not moving." The man in 2B, who had been staring at his folded newspaper, muttered under his breath, "Just switch with her, man. It's not worth the trouble." But across the aisle, a woman with auburn hair whispered sharply to him, "It is worth it. It's his seat. Don't you see what's happening?" The tension was no longer confined to one row. It seeped outward, pressing on everyone present, forcing them to choose between silence and conscience. Most chose silence. Michael drew a slow breath, steadying himself. He had lived through scenes like this too many times. In the lobby of a bank where the teller looked twice at his signature. At a hotel where the clerk asked for extra identification. At restaurants where service arrived late, cold, after being given to tables that had arrived after him. Always the same undertone, "You don't belong here." But he had promised himself, long ago, that if it ever came to this moment again, he would not step aside. Evelyn leaned back, her voice rising so that everyone could hear. "You're making a spectacle of yourself. Real first-class travelers know how to behave." This, she gestured toward Michael's gray hoodie and sneakers, "isn't how people like us travel. Be honest. When was the last time you sat here without begging for compensation?" Her laughter was sharp and hollow. The phrase, "people like us," cut deeper than she realized. It wasn't just arrogance. It was exclusion dressed as entitlement. Jamal Reed, the young man in row 3, shifted in his seat. He was a 22-year-old college student, thin-framed, with his backpack tucked under his legs. His phone was already recording. The live stream was climbing quickly, viewers typing furiously. She really said that. "Stay strong, man." "This is disgusting," Jamal whispered into the camera. "You're seeing this live? She just said he doesn't belong here because of how he looks." A ripple moved across the internet while the cabin itself remained frozen. Michael looked directly at Evelyn now. His tone had no anger, no raised volume, just quiet certainty. "I am not here for a scene. I am here to take the seat I paid for. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less." Evelyn scoffed, loud and theatrical. "Paid for, with what don't insult my intelligence. I've seen this trick before. People like you create drama so the airline will offer upgrades or free flights. But it won't work with me." The woman across the aisle, her name was Marjorie, though no one in that cabin knew it yet, folded her arms, whispering to her husband, "This isn't about upgrades. This is about dignity." Her husband nodded silently, though his eyes stayed down. Michael could feel the weight of every gaze on him, the familiar ache of being judged, sized up, doubted. His mother's face flashed in his mind again, her voice soft but resolute the day they were pulled off a flight decades ago. "Son, one day this will change. That day was here. Mrs. "Pierce," he said, each word careful and steady, "I respect your loyalty to this airline, but respect does not give ownership. This seat is mine, and I will not move." Evelyn's lips curled, her voice pitched higher. "You don't get it. To you, status matters. Experience matters. My husband spends millions here. We practically fund this airline. You standing there, holding a piece of paper, doesn't mean you're equal to me." The words rang through the cabin like a verdict. Gasps escaped from at least 2 rows back. A passenger muttered, "Did she really just say that Michael's silence in response was not weakness? It was strength." He simply stood, still as stone, his boarding pass steady in his hand, his gaze unshaken. Jamal's livestream viewer count ticked past 700. Comments scrolled faster now. "She's digging her own grave. Stand firm, brother. This is history happening live." Rachel Adams, sitting quietly in row 4, clicked her pen and opened her notebook. She was a freelance journalist traveling to San Francisco for another assignment. But instinct told her she had just found the real story of her trip. She began scribbling, "Black man denied rightful seat. Woman invokes status. Crowd divided. This isn't about travel. It's about America." Evelyn threw her head back, letting out a sharp laugh that was meant to dismiss but only added fuel. "Look around. No one is standing up for you. You see, they all know I belong here, and you well. You're holding us all up." Michael finally sat down. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the boarding pass on the tray table in front of him, folded his hands, and looked forward. He didn't speak. He didn't threaten. He didn't plead. He simply claimed what was his. The act of sitting down carried more weight than any argument. It was defiance without a shout. It was dignity in its quietest form. The cabin stilled again, a silence thicker than before. Passengers shifted, eyes darting between Evelyn's red face and Michael's steady presence. The tension was no longer just uncomfortable. It was unbearable. Something had to give. But Michael Lawson, for once, wasn't going to be the one who gave way. The quiet in the cabin cracked when a figure in a navy blue uniform approached. Julia Kim, the lead flight attendant, walked down the aisle with the kind of brisk authority that comes from years of dealing with passengers who needed calming, convincing, or corralling. Her dark hair was pulled into a perfect bun. Her blazer pressed. Her smile polite but tight. "Good afternoon," Julia began, her voice pitched to carry across the first-class cabin. She extended her hand toward Michael. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Michael handed it over without hesitation. She scanned it, her eyes narrowing slightly as she confirmed the details. "Seat 1A," she said under her breath, almost as if she hadn't expected it. Then she looked toward Evelyn Pierce. "Mrs. Pierce, it appears this seat is assigned to Mr. Lawson. I'll be happy to escort you to your assigned seat in 3C." Evelyn's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. "Excuse me, do you have any idea who I am? I've flown this airline for years. I've sat in this very seat dozens of times. I don't care what his piece of paper says. This is my seat." Julia took a measured breath. Her training told her to diffuse tension, not inflame it. She turned back to Michael with a polite smile that carried the weight of compromise. Sir, I understand this is your assigned seat. However, for the sake of avoiding a delay, perhaps we could offer you a seat in 2C or 2D. You'd still enjoy the same service, and I can add some compensation for the inconvenience." Michael's voice was steady. "I'm not asking for compensation. I'm asking for fairness." The words seemed to hang in the air, too simple to be dismissed. Julia blinked, unused to this kind of quiet refusal. Most passengers either shouted or sighed and moved. Michael's calm unsettled her more than anger might have. She glanced toward Evelyn, who folded her arms with a smirk that said, "See, even she knows I'm right." "This isn't about fairness," Evelyn cut in loudly. "It's about status. You don't just walk into first class because you want to. You earn it." Michael turned his head toward her slowly, his eyes clear but not cruel. "And I did earn it, Mrs. Pierce. I paid for this seat, just like you paid for yours. What you're asking isn't about status. It's about entitlement." Gasps rippled across the cabin. A passenger in row 2 shifted uncomfortably, pulling at his collar. Another whispered, "He's right." Julia felt the weight of dozens of eyes. Her job was to maintain order, but order sometimes meant bending rules for the loudest voice, and in this case, Evelyn Pierce was shouting with more than volume. She was shouting with confidence, with years of unchallenged privilege. "I'll need to check with the captain," Julia said finally, handing the boarding pass back to Michael. "Please remain here for now." She turned on her heel and disappeared toward the cockpit. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dripping with triumph. "See, even she knows you don't belong here. They'll move you in a minute. You'll see." Michael said nothing. He placed the boarding pass carefully on his tray table again, folding his hands over it. Silence was not weakness, it was a choice. From behind, Jamal Reed's live stream was buzzing. His camera caught every word, every glance, every pause. The viewer count jumped to over 3,000 hours. Comments scrolled so fast they blurred, he's standing his ground. "She's entitled beyond belief. This is bigger than a seat." Rachel Adams, her pen scratching furiously, thought about how to frame the moment in her notes. She had covered politics, crime, even natural disasters. But there was something raw about this scene that felt historic, not because of who was involved, but because of how ordinary it looked. A man, a seat, a refusal, and underneath it all, the oldest wound in America. Minutes later, Julia returned. She wasn't alone. Captain William Hart followed behind her, his pilot's cap tucked under his arm. He was in his late 50s, tall and broad, with a voice that carried the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his baritone cutting through the hush, "we need to resolve a seating dispute before we can depart. Mr. Lawson, I understand this is your assigned seat. However, for the sake of avoiding further delay, I'd ask you to consider moving to an equivalent seat so we can get this flight in the air." Evelyn smiled like a queen whose verdict had just been read aloud. Michael looked up at the captain. His voice was still calm, still soft, but there was iron in it. "Captain, peace without fairness is not peace at all. If I move, I surrender not just a seat, but my dignity, and I will not surrender." The words struck the cabin like a bell, clear, unyielding. The man in 2B put down his newspaper completely now, staring wide-eyed at Michael. Marjorie across the aisle whispered, "That's courage." Jamal whispered to his phone, "Did you hear that he said he won't surrender?" Captain Hart's jaw flexed. He wasn't used to passengers quoting principles to him. He was used to compliance. But before he could reply, Evelyn broke the silence with a triumphant laugh. "There. You see, he's refusing orders from the captain. Do your job. Remove him. He doesn't belong here, and he's holding us all hostage with his little speech about dignity." Hart hesitated. Julia looked uneasy. The cabin felt like a powder keg waiting for the next spark. Michael leaned back in his seat, eyes forward, hands folded. His refusal wasn't just words, it was posture. It was a declaration without shouting, and in that stillness, the pressure built. The stage was set for something far larger than a single seat. The cabin was no longer just a space for travelers. It had become a stage. Every row a vantage point, every passenger an unwilling spectator. Whispers rippled through the air, uneven and nervous, as people tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Michael Lawson sat firm in seat 1A, his boarding pass still resting on the tray table like silent proof. Evelyn Pierce perched 2 feet away, stiff with indignation, her pearls shining under the cabin light, her expression sharpened by self-righteous fury. Captain Hart stood looming near the cockpit entrance, arms folded, his authority challenged in a way he hadn't expected. The silence fractured when a man in row 2 finally spoke. He was middle-aged, wearing a sport coat over a polo shirt, his briefcase tucked under his legs. "Come on, man," he muttered toward Michael, not quite loud enough to be brave, but clear enough for the rows nearby to hear. "It's just a seat. Don't hold us all up. Take another one and let's move." Marjorie, across the aisle, whipped her head toward him. "It's not just a seat," she snapped. Her voice carried further than she intended, and several heads turned. "It's about what's right. Can't you see that?" The man shifted in his chair, embarrassed, muttering, "I just want to get home." That was the fracture line: convenience versus conscience. The cabin was split, though few wanted to admit it. Some stared at their phones harder. Others looked away as though ignoring the conflict would erase it. Evelyn seized the moment, raising her chin high. "Exactly. Everyone just wants to get home. And he's the one keeping us here. He doesn't care about your time, your connections, your families waiting. He just wants to make a scene." Jamal Reed's live stream caught her words. Thousands of viewers were now tuned in, comments flashing like neon signs gaslighting 101. "She's blaming him for what she caused. Stay strong, brother." Michael's fingers pressed lightly against his boarding pass, grounding himself. He could feel the sting of Evelyn's words. He knew the tactic: well twist the narrative, make him the problem instead of the victim. It had worked against him before. In corporate meetings where he was painted as difficult. In negotiations where holding his ground was reframed as aggressive. But this time, there were witnesses. Rachel Adams scribbled furiously in her notebook. She had covered heated school board meetings, loud political rallies, Courtrooms filled with tension, but this was different. It was subtle, quiet, yet alive with consequence. The stakes weren't measured in dollars or votes. They were measured in dignity. Michael inhaled slowly and spoke, not to Evelyn this time, but to the cabin itself. I didn't create this scene. I am sitting in the seat I was assigned. Nothing more, nothing less. If that is enough to hold us all up, then perhaps the problem is not mine. The words were soft, but they carried. Heads turned. A few passengers nodded without realizing it. Someone murmured, "That's fair." Evelyn barked out a laugh. "Don't fall for that act. He's playing the victim." That's what they do. The phrase "they do" landed like a heavy stone in still water. A collective intake of breath followed. Even those who had stayed quiet stiffened. The mask of respectability slipped, revealing the raw prejudice underneath. Jamal whispered into his phone, "You heard that?" "Right. She just said it." The comments exploded. "She's done. This is going viral. Don't let him move." Michael looked at Evelyn, his voice almost tender. "Mrs. Pierce, this isn't about you and me. It's about what you believe you're entitled to, and about what I refuse to surrender." Her face flushed deep red. "Entitled? You think I don't deserve this seat? I've earned it with loyalty, with money, with years of travel. What have you done for the first time?" Michael's eyes darkened. He didn't raise his voice, but there was a quiet thunder in it. "What have I done? I've worked. I've built. I've sacrificed. I've spent my life being told I don't belong, and I've proven, time and again, that I do. This seat was paid for in full, just like yours, and I will not apologize for sitting in it." The cabin fell into silence again, a silence heavier than before, weighted with truth. Rachel paused her pen, her throat tightening. She felt the sting of his words as if they had been spoken directly to her. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't dramatic. They were lived. Captain Hart shifted uneasily, clearing his throat. "Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Pierce, let's try to keep this civil." But his voice lacked conviction now, dulled by the reality unfolding in front of him. Evelyn shook her head, refusing to yield. "Civil? He's disrespecting the entire process. He's holding this whole flight hostage, and you're letting him." Her words echoed, but they no longer landed as cleanly. Passengers exchanged looks. Some rolled their eyes. The spell of her authority, her assumption of dominance, was starting to fray. Jamal's live stream ticked past 12,000 viewers. Comments began to shift tone. "This isn't just a plane ride. This is history. We're watching a movement in real time." Michael remained steady, his hands folded, his body relaxed. The stillness wasn't passive. It was power contained, controlled, waiting. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice again. "Son, dignity is the one thing they can't take unless you give it away." He whispered those words to himself, barely audible, but enough to anchor his resolve. Marjorie leaned across the aisle, her voice quiet but firm. "Don't move," she said to Michael. "You're right, and some of us see it." Michael gave the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement. For Evelyn, the tide of the room shifting was intolerable. She straightened her blazer, glaring at the passengers around her. "Don't you all see this isn't just about me? If he can just take this seat, what does that mean for the rest of us? For the people who earned their place here, a man in a row 5 finally spoke, his voice weary but sharp. Lady, he did earn it, just not in a way you recognize. The remark drew murmurs of agreement. Evelyn's mouth fell open, her confidence cracked for the first time. Michael said nothing. He didn't need to. The crowd was beginning to see the truth without his help. Rachel tapped her pen against her notebook, her reporter's instincts buzzing. She knew the climax hadn't come yet, but the atmosphere had shifted. This was no longer just a standoff. It was a revelation. Michael Lawson sat still in seat 1A, but his presence had grown. He wasn't just one man holding a ticket. He was a mirror, reflecting every prejudice, every silence, every choice to look away, and the passengers, some reluctantly, some defiantly, were starting to look. The murmur of the cabin hushed as Captain William Hart remained standing near the front, his broad shoulders blocking the aisle. He was a man who carried himself like authority itself, every inch of his uniform pressed, his gold-trimmed epaulets gleaming. Normally, his presence alone ended disputes before they escalated. But today, his voice didn't silence the room. He looked from Evelyn Pierce, red-faced and defiant, to Michael Lawson, calm and steady in seat 1A. His tone, when he spoke, was firm but carefully measured. "Mr. Lawson," he began, "I understand this seat was assigned to you. I also understand that we are facing a delay, and every minute counts. Out of respect for the other passengers, I'm asking you to move to another seat. You'll receive equivalent accommodations and full compensation for the inconvenience." Evelyn smiled triumphantly, as though the captain had confirmed everything she had argued. She leaned back in her seat with the smugness of victory. Michael kept his eyes on the captain. His voice was quiet, even gentle, but each word carried like a bell through the cabin. "Captain, I respect your responsibility to keep this flight on schedule, but peace without fairness is surrender. If I move, I give up not only a seat but my dignity. And I will not surrender." The words did not come with raised fists or shouted tones. They came with stillness, with restraint. That stillness rattled Evelyn more than any outburst could have. Several passengers shifted in their seats. The man in 2B, who had earlier urged Michael to give up, lowered his gaze, guilt flickering across his face. Marjorie clasped her hands tightly, whispering to no one in particular. "That's the truth, if I've ever heard it." Captain Hart frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. "Sir, I need to maintain order. It's not about surrender. It's about efficiency, about moving forward without conflict." Michael shook his head slightly. "Captain, efficiency is not order when it comes at the cost of justice. If the price of avoiding conflict is one man giving up his rightful place because someone else demands it, then what order are we preserving?" The cabin went silent again, heavier than before. His words had struck something deeper than a seating dispute. Evelyn broke the silence with a scoff. "Order justice. Don't make this bigger than it is. It's a seat, for heaven's sake, a seat I've earned by loyalty, by years of supporting this airline. He's just being stubborn to make a point." Michael turned his head toward her, his expression calm, almost sorrowful. And what point are you making, Mrs. Pierce? That a seat belongs to you not because you paid for it, but because of who you think you are." Her jaw clenched. She sputtered, "I don't have to explain myself to you." But the cracks were beginning to show. A few passengers nodded at Michael's words. Others avoided Evelyn's gaze. The spell of her entitlement was thinning. Rachel Adams' pen flew across her notebook. She could feel the tension building toward something irreversible. She thought of all the stories she had written before, and none of them carried this raw simplicity. A man, a woman, a seat. Yet it was about more than travel. It was about the quiet war over who belonged. Captain Hart exhaled slowly. "Mr. Lawson, this is not the time or place for grand statements. We need to get in the air." Michael's gaze was steady, his voice unwavering. "Captain, this is exactly the time, because dignity denied in silence grows heavier each time it is carried. Today, I refuse to carry it." The passengers absorbed the words in uneasy quiet. Some looked ashamed. Others looked inspired. Jamal's live stream viewer count had passed 20,000, and the comments scrolled so fast they blurred goosebumps. "This man is speaking for all of us. Captain doesn't get it. This is the place." Evelyn leaned forward again, pointing at Michael as if she were prosecuting him. "You see, he's refusing your orders. Captain, this is insubordination. You have the authority, use it. Remove him. Now." All eyes shifted back to the captain. For a moment, Hart hesitated. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing on him from both sides. Evelyn demanding swift action. Michael refusing to yield. And behind them, a cabin full of passengers and audience that would judge whatever choice he made. Julia Kim, standing just behind the captain, spoke softly, almost pleadingly. "Captain, perhaps we can wait another moment. Escalating may only make this worse." Hart gave her a look that mixed irritation with doubt. He wasn't accustomed to indecision, but even he could feel it now the balance of the room had shifted. This wasn't a simple customer dispute. It was something larger, heavier, a symbol waiting to be claimed. Evelyn slammed her hand against the armrest. "This is ridiculous. Are we really going to sit here all day while he plays martyr? I've flown here for years. I've earned this. You let him sit there, and you're saying status means nothing." Michael replied softly. "Status does not outweigh truth." The words cut through her anger, quiet but sharp. Evelyn's face flushed, her confidence faltering for the first time. Passengers stirred again. A man in row 5 whispered, "He's right." Another woman nodded. Slowly, the cabin was bending not toward Evelyn's demand for removal, but toward Michael's insistence on fairness. Rachel's pen stopped. She looked up, realizing the story was no longer waiting for her to describe it. It was unfolding, alive, undeniable. Michael Lawson remained still in seat 1A. He did not shout. He did not argue. He sat as if the seat itself was a promise he intended to keep. And for the first time since the conflict began, the balance of power was no longer tilting toward Evelyn Pierce. It was shifting, almost imperceptibly, toward him. The air inside the cabin grew dense, like everyone was holding their breath. Michael Lawson sat steady in seat 1A. his boarding pass still visible on the tray table. Evelyn Pierce, her chest heaving, turned toward the crowd of passengers as if summoning allies. "Why are you all sitting there in silence?" she demanded. Her voice was shrill, every syllable sharpened by frustration. "Do you want to sit here forever? He is the reason we haven't left the gate. He doesn't belong here, and he is making a spectacle of himself. Don't any of you care about getting to your destination on time?" No one answered. Some passengers shifted in their seats, looking down at their laps. A few glanced at Michael, then quickly away. Silence wasn't support for Evelyn anymore, it was disapproval. Marjorie, who had watched quietly for so long, leaned just enough into the aisle to speak. Her voice was calm, but it carried. "He's not the reason we're still sitting here. Mrs. Pierce, he paid for that seat. You didn't." Gasps scattered through the cabin. Evelyn whipped her head toward Marjorie, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? Who even are you? Someone who's tired of people thinking they can buy respect." Marjorie replied. Her hands trembled, but her chin didn't waver. Evelyn's lips curled. "You think you understand respect? I've given more to this airline than you can imagine. My husband's contracts alone." "Your money doesn't buy decency," Marjorie interrupted. The words were simple, but they landed like stones. For a moment, Evelyn was speechless. The authority she had leaned on all her life seemed to slip away with each second of silence. Her face reddened, her fingers tightening around the armrest. Michael finally spoke, his voice softer than before, almost reflective. "Mrs. Pierce, I don't want this to be about humiliation, but every time someone says, 'Move for the sake of peace,' it teaches us to stay small, and that lesson has cost too much already." Jamal's live stream ticked past 40,000 viewers. Comments rolled across his screen. "She's crumbling. This man is a rock. History in real time." Captain Hart rubbed his temples. He muttered into his radio, requesting ground staff to stand by. Julia Kim, standing nearby, looked at him anxiously. "Captain, please, security will make this worse. If they drag him off, the whole plane will erupt." But Evelyn seized on the suggestion like a lifeline. "Yes, call them. Call security. Drag him out of here like he deserves. I will not spend another minute on this aircraft with him in that seat. If you don't remove him, I'll ensure this airline regrets it. Every contract, every cent of loyalty my family has given you, I'll pull it all." She turned to the passengers again, her voice trembling with anger. "And all of you, you'll regret siding with him. You'll regret letting someone like him hold this plane hostage." Michael didn't flinch. He folded his hands neatly on his lap, his calm an anchor against her storm. "You can threaten me. You can threaten the airline. But the truth doesn't bend to threats. This is my seat, and I am staying." Rachel Adams scribbled furiously in her notebook, her pen almost tearing the page. The journalist in her sensed the story had passed the point of no return. It was no longer about compromise. It was about exposure. Evelyn Pierce's words were stripping away every layer of pretense, leaving her bias raw and naked for all to see. Evelyn's voice cracked. "You think this makes you equal? It doesn't. You will never be equal." The cabin erupted in whispers. A man in row 5 shook his head in disbelief. A woman across the aisle pressed a hand to her mouth. The words had hung in the air like a confession, undeniable and ugly. Michael leaned back slightly, his eyes steady. His voice was quieter now, but somehow stronger. "That's where you're wrong, Mrs. Pierce. Equality is not granted by you, or by anyone who looks like you. It exists. And today, I refuse to let you deny it." Captain Hart's radio crackled. Two uniformed security officers appeared at the door of the cabin, their expressions tense. Evelyn straightened, triumphant again. Finally, "Now get him out." But before the officers moved, Michael reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a sleek black phone. He tapped deliberately, his movements calm, unhurried. When he raised the phone for all to see, the cabin seemed to lean forward as one. On the screen glowed a secure interface, Apex Airlines Executive Command System, his name emblazoned at the top, Lawson, Michael, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. The effect was instantaneous. Evelyn froze, her mouth half open. The captain's eyes widened, his confidence draining. Even the officers faltered, their steps halting mid-aisle. Michael's voice filled the silence. "You called for authority. Captain, here I am, the highest authority this airline has, and I will make this very simple. This aircraft does not leave the ground until fairness is restored." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Jamal's live stream counter exploded past 70,000. Rachel's pen dropped from her hand. Evelyn stammered. That's not possible. You can't be." Michael's gaze didn't waver. "You looked at me and saw only what you wanted to see. A man in a hoodie. A face you thought didn't belong, but you never stopped to consider that I might be the one who signs your captain's paycheck, or that the seat you tried to claim belongs to the man who owns every plane in this fleet." The silence that followed was thick, stunned. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some began to clap quietly, the sound hesitant but growing. Michael Lawson remained seated in 1A, but in that moment the cabin belonged to him. The cabin, once thick with tension, now hummed with disbelief. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. The only sound came from the faint buzz of Jamal Reed's phone as his live stream surged past 100,000 viewers. Faces glowed in the light of their own devices as news spread faster than the engines cooling outside the window. Evelyn Pierce sat rigid, her manicured hands trembling as if the ground beneath her had shifted. "No," she muttered. "This is absurd. You can't be serious. You're dressed like—" Her voice trailed off. Every excuse she had relied on status. Money, appearances collapsed under the weight of Michael Lawson's revelation. Michael didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lowered the phone, placed it gently on the tray table beside his boarding pass, and folded his hands again. His calm was more commanding than any declaration could have been. Captain William Hart swallowed hard. "Mr. Lawson," he said, his voice uncertain. If I had known, Michael raised a hand. Silence in him. "That's the point. Captain, you didn't know. You looked at me and saw less, when I was never less. And today, you tried to resolve injustice by asking the victim to surrender. That stops now." The captain's mouth opened, then closed again. He had no defense. Julia Kim, standing just behind him, lowered her gaze, shame flickering across her face. Rachel Adams scribbled in her notebook, but her mind was already racing ahead. She could see the headline forming in her mind: Black CEO grounds his own flight over discrimination. It wasn't just a story. It was a movement breaking open in real time. Evelyn's composure cracked. "You can't do this to me. I'm a platinum member. I've been loyal to this airline for over a decade. My husband spends millions." Michael turned toward her, his expression steady, almost compassionate. "Loyalty isn't measured by money, Mrs. Pierce. It's measured by how we treat each other when no one is watching, and the world is watching you now." Evelyn's face drained of color. She glanced at Jamal's phone, at Rachel's raised camera, at the dozens of passengers staring back at her. For the first time in her life, perhaps, she realized her influence had limits. Marjorie, the older passenger who had spoken earlier, leaned into the aisle. "You've humiliated yourself enough, dear. Maybe it's time you stopped digging." The cabin rippled with quiet laughter, soft but unmistakable. Evelyn recoiled as though struck. Michael tapped his phone once more, pulling up another screen. The red words glowed clearly for all to see: CEO override ground aircraft. He turned back to the captain. "Return this plane to the gate. Now." Hart blinked. "Sir, grounding a flight will cause delays across the system. The board, the regulators. They'll answer to me," Michael said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of finality. "Do it." The captain hesitated only a moment longer before pressing his radio. "Tower, this is Flight 227. CEO override confirmed. Returning to gate C14 immediately." A hush swept the cabin as the engines powered down, and the plane began to roll slowly back toward the terminal. Through the small oval windows, flashing lights appeared: camera crews, reporters, even police units waiting on the tarmac. Evelyn's breathing quickened. "This is madness," she hissed. "You're going to regret this. I'll have your job. You already tried that." Michael interrupted softly. "And you failed. Because this was never about my job. It was about dignity. Mine. And everyone else who's ever been told to move when they didn't need to." The words struck deep. Some passengers clapped, tentative at first, then louder. A woman in row 3 wiped a tear from her cheek. Jamal's livestream comments exploded. "This man is a legend. History happening right here. Never thought I'd see this on a plane." Rachel's phone buzzed as editors texted her furiously. "Get quotes. Get details. This is front-page material." As the jet bridge extended toward the aircraft, Evelyn slumped back in her seat. Her defiance had shriveled into silence, her diamond earrings glinting under the harsh cabin lights like fading trophies of a life built on entitlement. Michael rose from his seat for the first time since the confrontation began. His 6-foot frame seemed taller in the narrow aisle, his presence filling the space. He turned to the passengers, his voice measured and clear. What happened here today wasn't about a chair, it was about dignity. It was about what happens when someone who believes they're untouchable meets someone who refuses to be diminished. Remember this moment. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who's ever been told they don't belong where they rightfully earned a place. The words echoed in the quiet cabin, sinking deep into the hearts of those who heard them. When the doors opened, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. The passengers followed Michael out of the jet bridge like witnesses to history, their whispers already forming into stories they would tell for the rest of their lives. Evelyn remained behind, her once iron grip on the narrative shattered, her threats drowned by applause that wasn't hers. Michael Lawson stepped into the terminal not as a passenger, but as a leader who had just turned humiliation into history. The sliding doors of the jet bridge opened, and the terminal swallowed Michael Lawson into a storm of flashing cameras and voices raised in urgent unison. It was as if the entire airport had tilted toward this gate. Every traveler, journalist, and worker drawn by the tidal wave of a story too big to contain. Mr. Lawson, did you really ground your own flight? A reporter shouted over the roar. Sir, what do you say to passengers inconvenienced by this decision? Another demanded, shoving a microphone forward. Michael raised his hand not to silence the questions, but to slow the moment. His deep, steady voice cut through the chaos. I will make a full statement soon. But understand this. What happened today was not a passenger dispute. It was a civil rights violation at 30,000 feet, and it will not be ignored. The crowd erupted again, microphones pushing closer, cameras capturing every flicker of his expression. Jamal Reed streamed live, still narrating in awe. You're watching history, folks. This isn't just a flight delay. This is bigger than aviation. It's about justice. Behind Michael, passengers exited the jet bridge, their voices hushed with awe. Marjorie clutched her handbag to her chest, whispering to another woman, I've never seen anything like that. I'll never forget it. Rachel Adams, her phone buzzing with nonstop messages from her editor, ducked beneath the camera to catch Michael's words. She knew instinctively that this moment was not just about reporting. It was about recording history in real time. Through the chaos, Evelyn Pierce stumbled into the terminal minutes later. Her once perfect hair was frayed, her lipstick smudged. She muttered about lawyers, about influence, about connections in Washington, but the cameras no longer pointed at her. The spotlight had shifted. The story had already chosen its hero. At the center of the chaos, Michael remained steady. His phone buzzed Marcus Hale, his chief of staff, pushing through the crowd with a tablet in hand. Sir, Marcus said breathlessly, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they all want you live. Social media is exploding. Apex shares are tanking. Lawson Global is up 10%. Civil rights groups are already issuing statements of support. Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. Then, this is bigger than me. We use this moment. We set a standard. Rebecca Lynn, Apex's Senior Vice President of Operations, arrived next. Her face was pale, her voice sharp. The board is convening an emergency session in 2 hours. Investors are rattled. Regulators are calling. Unions are demanding answers. We need directives. Michael, this is spiraling. Michael shook his head slowly. It only spirals if we treat truth like a problem. This isn't a crisis. It's an opportunity to fix what we should have fixed years ago. His words weren't for Rebecca alone. They carried to the reporters still clustered around him, to the passengers who lingered nearby, to Jamal's audience that had ballooned past 200,000. Rachel caught the phrase in her notebook. Truth isn't a crisis. She circled it twice. It was a headline in the making. Sophia Turner, a senator Michael had worked with on tech policy, called moments later. Marcus pressed the phone into his hand. Michael answered calmly, his tone unchanged despite the noise around him. "Michael, the country is behind you," Senator Turner said. "We're already drafting hearings to investigate bias in air travel. Don't stop now." "I won't," Michael replied before handing the phone back to Marcus. The cameras flashed again, drowning his quiet promise in bursts of white light. By now, the entire terminal buzzed with the trending tag projected on every phone screen, Apex Justice. Stories poured in from strangers across the country, accounts of being humiliated at gates, questioned about tickets, forced to move despite paying their fare. Rachel glanced at her notifications and felt her throat tighten. Thousands of people were already writing. "This is my story, too." Michael turned to the cluster of reporters, his expression steady. "Effective immediately," he said. "Every discrimination complaint at Apex Airlines will be escalated to the corporate level. Every complaint will require executive review. And every employee found guilty of bias will face suspension or termination. No exceptions. No excuses." Gasps rolled through the terminal. The reporters surged forward with more questions, but the passengers began to clap spontaneously. For a moment, the sound was louder than the cameras, louder than the chaos. Jamal angled his phone, his voice trembling with excitement. "Did you hear that? No more excuses. He just set a new bar for every airline in America." Marcus leaned close, whispering urgently, "Sir, your words are already being quoted on every major outlet. This is moving faster than anything I've ever seen." Michael's reply was simple. "Then we stop managing it. We lead it." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. She'd covered politics, scandals, corporate crashes, but this felt different. This was leadership raw, unfiltered, unafraid. She wrote in her notebook, "He's not playing defense. He's rewriting the rules. Behind them." Evelyn tried one last time, her voice shrill and desperate. "This isn't over. I'll sue until this airline collapses." But no one listened. The cameras didn't turn. The reporters didn't care. The world no longer needed her denial because the story had already found its symbol. Michael Lawson stood in the middle of the terminal, not with the power of money or status, but with the strength of truth, and the nation was watching. By the time Michael Lawson reached the downtown headquarters of Apex Airlines, the sun had already dipped behind the skyline. The glass tower shimmered in twilight, its reflection cut by the glow of camera crews stationed outside. Protesters and supporters alike gathered at the base, waving signs, chanting slogans that had sprung to life in only a matter of hours. Dignity at 30,000 feet and Apex Justice. Now Michael stepped through the revolving doors, his calm unbroken. Marcus Hale walked at his side, tablet buzzing with notifications. Rebecca Lynn hurried behind them, already listing the crises union demands, investor panic, FAA inquiries, but Michael listened in silence. His footsteps measured, each echo in the marble lobby carrying authority. When the elevator doors slid open to the top floor, The boardroom was already buzzing. A dozen executives sat around the long, polished table, their faces etched with concern. Stock charts glowed on the wall screens, a red line dipping as Apex's valuation shed billions in a single trading session. Gerald Whitaker, the oldest board member and chair of the Finance Committee, rose to his feet. His silver hair gleamed under the lights. "Michael, what on earth were you thinking? Grounding a flight, turning an airline into a stage for your personal crusade. You've cost us dearly, investors are furious, regulators are circling, and we're hanging by a thread." Michael set his phone on the table, its screen still glowing with messages of support from customers and civil rights leaders. He looked Whitaker squarely in the eye. "I wasn't staging a crusade. I was defending the soul of this airline. If dignity costs billions, then maybe we're finally learning the real price of ignoring it." A murmur spread around the table. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, intrigued despite themselves. Rebecca slid into a chair, her tone clipped. "Michael, with respect, the optics are powerful, but optics don't pay bills. We've got routes to run, planes to fuel, contracts to honor. Investors want stability, not slogans." Michael's reply was quiet, but it silenced the room. Stability built on silence is collapse waiting to happen. We ignored these issues for too long, thinking they wouldn't reach the surface. Today, they surfaced at 1A, and the world saw. The door opened again, and Senator Sophia Turner entered, uninvited but undeterred. She strode across the room, flanked by two aides. "Gentlemen, ladies sorry to intrude, but this isn't just corporate fallout anymore. This is political. Washington is watching. The FAA is drafting new guidelines as we speak, and Michael Lawson has the chance to lead, or Apex will be forced to follow." The board erupted in whispers. Whitaker's face reddened. "With all due respect, Senator, this is a private corporate matter." No one, Turner cut him off sharply. "This is a national matter. Civil rights don't pause at the boarding gate. The question is simple. Will Apex Airlines set the new standard, or be dragged into it kicking and screaming?" All eyes turned back to Michael. He stood slowly, his reflection stretching across the glass wall behind him. "We're not being dragged. We're stepping forward. I propose immediate adoption of a zero-tolerance policy for bias across the company. Mandatory equity training for all staff, direct reporting channels to my office, and public transparency of every discrimination complaint logged and resolved." Gasps echoed around the table. One executive muttered, "That's suicide." Another whispered, "That's revolutionary." Whitaker slammed his fist against the table. "You'll alienate half our customers. You'll cripple morale." Michael's voice was steady. "Then let them go. The customers who believe fairness is optional are not our future. The employees who resist accountability are not our future. We are not in the business of moving bodies from point A to B. We are in the business of moving people with dignity." Silence fell. The words lingered in the air like a verdict. Rachel Adams, invited to observe as press liaison, scribbled furiously at the far end of the room. Her notes blurred as she realized what she was witnessing, not just a CEO defending his company, but a leader reframing the entire industry. Senator Turner leaned back, folding her arms. "You've got public momentum. Michael, The country wants this, but the question is, does your board have the courage to follow? The vote was called. Hands rose reluctantly. Some with hesitation, others with quiet resolve. When the tally ended, Whitaker's opposition was drowned by a slim but undeniable majority. Michael nodded once. Then it's decided. Tonight, Apex Airlines will announce the dignity protocols. Tomorrow, the industry changes. Rebecca exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders. Marcus smiled faintly, pride flickering in his eyes. Whitaker, however, leaned forward, his voice a growl. You think this ends with applause? The markets will punish us. Investors will flee. And when they do, don't expect loyalty from this board. Michael met his glare without flinching. If we fall because we chose dignity, then we'll fall standing tall, and history will remember which side we chose. Outside. The chants of protesters rose louder, their voices echoing through the glass tower. Michael turned toward the window, his reflection merging with the lights of the city beyond. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself a quiet breath. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The press conference was announced only 3 hours after the boardroom vote. By then, the city's convention center was swarming with reporters, camera crews, and citizens who had streamed in from surrounding neighborhoods. Some carried signs that read, "We fly with dignity," and Lawson leads. Others held photos of relatives who had suffered humiliations while traveling, each story fueling the growing tide of collective memory. Michael Lawson stood backstage, adjusting his tie in the mirror. For years, he had been photographed at galas, investor summits, and ribbon cuttings. But tonight was different. This wasn't about quarterly reports or market confidence. Tonight, his words would etch themselves into the public consciousness or dissolve into noise if he failed. Marcus Hale touched his shoulder. The live stream's already clocking 500,000 viewers. By the time you hit the podium, it'll be more. Rebecca Lynn added. Every network is carrying this live. Investors, regulators, even rival airlines are watching. One wrong word, and they'll use it to bury you. Michael gave them both a small, steady smile. Then, I'll choose words they can't bury. Senator Sophia Turner appeared beside him, her voice firm. Speak to the people first, Michael. The boardroom language can wait. Tonight, the country doesn't want a CEO. They want a witness, someone to say out loud what they've lived in silence. Michael nodded. Then that's what I'll be. The lights dimmed. The host's voice boomed through the hall, and then he stepped onto the stage. The room erupted in applause, flashes from cameras painting the air white. Michael raised his hands gently, letting the applause die down. His voice, when it came, was low and unhurried, but every syllable carried. 3 hours ago, a woman looked at me and decided I did not belong in a seat I had rightfully purchased. She decided her status outweighed my dignity. And when challenged, the system around her tried to keep peace by asking me to surrender. But peace without justice is not peace. It is submission. And submission I will not give. The hall was silent, hanging on his words. He continued, Some of you may say, it was only a seat. But for many of us, the fight for dignity never stops at the seat. It follows us at the bank counter, at the job interview, at the traffic stop. The seat becomes a symbol of something larger whether we are seen as equals or as intruders in our own lives. The audience stirred, nodding. Jamal Reed, streaming live from the front row, panned his phone across the crowd as comments poured in. Preach. That's my story, too. I've lived this. Michael paused, scanning the room. When I refused to give up that seat, it was not just for me. It was for every child told they were too loud to be heard. For every traveler pulled aside because their skin didn't match the name on their passport. For every voice that was silenced with the words, "It's not worth the fight." Tonight, I say it is worth the fight. The crowd erupted in applause. Some rose to their feet. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Rachel Adams, notebook balanced on her lap, scribbled furiously. She underlined one sentence 3 times. It is worth the fight. Michael's tone shifted, firmer now. As of tonight, Apex Airlines is adopting the dignity protocols. Every employee will be trained. Every complaint will be reviewed at the highest level, and every act of bias will carry consequences. Transparency will no longer be optional, it will be public, and we will not stop until fairness is the standard, not the exception. Reporters shot their hands up, shouting questions, but Michael pressed on. I know some of you worry this will cost us, and maybe it will. But if the price of doing right is profit, then let the markets fall. Because a company without integrity is already bankrupt. The audience roared again, louder than before. Even Rebecca Lynn, who had argued against the protocols, found herself clapping despite her reservations. Evelyn Pierce, watching from her home, threw her wine glass at the television. Her name was already trending online, her reputation unraveling with every replay of her words, "You will never be equal." The nation had judged her, and the verdict was final. Michael's speech continued, weaving between personal reflection and corporate vision. He spoke of his grandmother, who had been denied service at restaurants, of his mother, who fought to be treated with respect at her workplace, of his own quiet battles in boardrooms where his competence was doubted before he spoke a single word. And then he ended where it all began. Seat 1A was more than a place on a plane. It was a question, who belongs tonight? I answer, we all belong, not by favor, not by tolerance, but by right. And I promise you this on every flight we operate, every gate we staff, every seat we sell you will belong. The hall thundered with applause, a sound that shook the walls. Viewers online flooded the stream with hearts, with tears, with affirmations. Hashtags multiplied, how we belong. Dignity protocols, Lawson leads, backstage. Marcus whispered to Rebecca, "Do you feel that that's not just applause, that's a movement catching fire?" Rachel closed her notebook and leaned back, overwhelmed. She had covered wars, elections, scandals, but never had she seen a man turn personal humiliation into national transformation in real time. Michael Lawson stepped away from the podium, his face calm but his eyes heavy with the weight of history. He knew the fight was far from over. There would be lawsuits, boycotts, angry investors, but tonight, for the first time, the world wasn't asking whether he belonged. Tonight, the world was asking how far his vision could take them. In the days following Michael Lawson's speech, the world reacted faster than any PR team could have anticipated. The story of Seat 1A had ignited conversations across living rooms, social media feeds, and boardrooms. People shared personal accounts of discrimination. Viral clips of the confrontation circulated endlessly, and debates flared in news programs and podcasts alike. At Apex Airlines headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Marcus Hale paced in the operations room, tablet in hand, tracking social media sentiment, investor calls, and regulatory inquiries simultaneously. "Sir, the hashtag #ShuckWeBelong has trended globally. The live feed has surpassed 5 million viewers. Airlines around the world are referencing our dignity protocols as a benchmark." Michael Lawson sat calmly behind his desk, hands folded, listening. "Good. Let the ripples spread," he said. "This isn't about fame. It's about shifting expectations, about creating accountability where it was missing." Rebecca Lynn, still catching her breath from the boardroom chaos days prior, leaned against the wall. "Sir, the CEO override we used on Flight 227. Other airlines are asking how we did it, what legal basis allows it, and whether they can implement similar measures. This has escalated beyond the original incident." Michael nodded. "And that's exactly the point. Change doesn't come from silence or fear. It comes from action that cannot be ignored. Every flight, every interaction, every complaint will now carry the weight of accountability. We don't just react, we set the standard." In the terminal where the original confrontation had occurred, Jamal Reed returned with his phone, now reporting on the systemic changes at Apex. The same passengers who had witnessed the scene firsthand shared stories on camera, how seeing a man stand firm had empowered them to speak out in their own workplaces and communities. Marjorie, the older passenger who had quietly supported Michael during the flight, now shared her story for a local news segment. "I've been traveling for decades," she said, her hands shaken slightly, "and I've seen how people are treated differently based on skin color, attire, or even how confident they look. Watching Mr. Lawson today reminded me that fairness isn't optional. It's a responsibility we all share." Meanwhile, Evelyn Pierce faced a personal reckoning. Public opinion had turned decisively against her. News outlets dissected her words and behavior on the plane. Corporate partners distanced themselves, and her family's influence, once a shield, proved ineffective against the viral exposure. She issued public apologies, but the damage was irreversible. The world no longer needed her acknowledgement. It needed systemic change, which Michael was delivering. Rachel Adams covered the aftermath extensively, documenting both the human and corporate impacts. She recorded employees of Apex Airlines, some of whom had previously turned a blind eye to bias, now speaking openly about experiences that had gone unreported. Flight attendants, pilots, and ground staff detailed improvements in training, transparency in reporting, and an emerging culture that valued dignity over expedience. Captain William Hart, initially skeptical, now oversaw the implementation of diversity and equity programs in the airline's training curriculum. "I've seen the difference between keeping peace and enforcing justice," he admitted during a media briefing. "Leadership isn't always about avoiding conflict. It's about protecting fairness, even when it's uncomfortable." Within Apex's executive offices, Michael convened a special task force. The team included Julia Kim, leading a new civil rights oversight division, and Marcus Hale, coordinating both internal compliance and public communications. Their goal was ambitious: ensure every complaint was logged, reviewed, and acted upon, creating a model that could not be ignored by regulators or competitors. Michael addressed the team during a strategy session. "We're not just changing policies, we're changing culture. Every interaction at Apex must reflect fairness. Every decision must be examined for bias. We're not merely responding to an incident, we're preventing the next one before it occurs." Outside the corporate sphere, the impact extended further. Universities and business schools began teaching the Apex Dignity Protocols as a case study in ethics and leadership. Civil rights organizations hailed Michael's actions as a landmark moment in corporate accountability. Other airlines, once skeptical or dismissive, scrambled to revise their policies, fearing both public backlash and regulatory intervention. In households across the nation, ordinary people shared the story of Seat 1A, relating to the humiliation Michael had endured and the dignity he reclaimed. Mothers and fathers spoke to their children about the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. Young professionals found inspiration in his measured yet resolute approach, seeing that power could be wielded not just for profit, but for fairness. Back at Apex, Michael reviewed the early data on customer satisfaction and internal compliance. Discrimination complaints had already dropped significantly, while positive feedback from passengers citing respectful treatment increased. Surveys indicated that trust in the airline, once precarious, was climbing steadily. Michael's approach was proving that leadership rooted in justice could coexist with profitability. That evening, Michael wrote in his journal, reflecting on the journey, "Justice is not a gift we receive. It is a duty we owe." He paused, considering the long path ahead. While much had been accomplished, he knew resistance would remain, and challenges were inevitable. Yet the current had shifted irrevocably. A moment that began with the seat dispute had become a catalyst for widespread transformation. Outside, the city lights blinked on, echoing the flicker of notifications and headlines across the globe. Michael looked at the skyline, sensing both the gravity and the promise of what had been set in motion. Months had passed since the incident aboard Flight 227. Apex Airlines had transformed in ways few could have predicted. Dignity protocols were now embedded into every level of the organization, from ground staff to flight crew, from customer service to executive leadership. Michael Lawson's vision had become a living system, one that held both employees and passengers accountable to a higher standard. In his office, overlooking the city skyline, Michael sat quietly, the evening sun casting golden streaks across the glass walls. The hum of the city below was a soft counterpoint to the storm of change he had orchestrated. Marcus Hale entered, tablet in hand, the glow illuminating his face. "Sir," Marcus said, "customer satisfaction has increased by nearly 20%, and discrimination complaints have dropped by 70%. Social media engagement remains high, and Apex is being recognized globally as the benchmark for corporate responsibility." Michael leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes distant. "Data is encouraging, Marcus, But numbers are not the legacy. Legacy is the people who feel seen and valued because we decided to act. It's the child boarding a plane who now believes their place is secure, simply because someone refused to be diminished. Rebecca Lynn walked in, holding a folder. "Sir, Linda Park and Captain Hart have returned from the national training tours." Staff feedback is overwhelmingly positive. They report feeling empowered rather than policed, and employees of color say they've never felt safer or more respected in their roles. Michael nodded thoughtfully. That's the point. Accountability without empowerment is tyranny. Empowerment without accountability is chaos. We need both, every day, consistently. Meanwhile, across the country, stories continued to emerge. Jamal Reed had published a follow-up video chronicling passengers' reflections and the systemic reforms Apex had enacted. Rachel Adams wrote an in-depth feature in a leading newspaper, detailing both the human and structural impact of Michael's actions. Universities now taught the Apex case as a blueprint for integrating ethics into corporate governance. One afternoon, Michael found himself returning to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, where it had all begun. Walking through the terminal, he overheard a mother and her young son. The boy clutched a boarding pass in his small hands and whispered, "Is that him?" The mother smiled softly. "Yes, baby, that's him, the man who made sure we could all belong." Michael's chest tightened. The journey from humiliation to systemic reform had been arduous, and the stakes were high. But moments like this reminded him why it was worth every challenge. Back at Apex headquarters, the board convened again, not in crisis but in recognition. Gerald Whitaker, older and quieter now, addressed the room. "Michael, I admit I was skeptical. I feared the financial repercussions, the regulatory scrutiny, the public backlash. But your leadership has proven that ethics and profitability are not mutually exclusive. In fact, your approach has strengthened both." Michael gave a small, deliberate nod. Ethics cannot be a side project. They must be integral to every decision, every policy. Profit alone is fleeting. Respect and dignity create lasting value. Senator Sophia Turner visited the office for a private briefing. "Michael, the Passenger Dignity Act has passed unanimously. Airlines nationwide are required to adopt policies similar to Apex. You've set a precedent that will ripple for decades." He listened, absorbing the gravity of the moment. The law can mandate rules, Senator, but culture must be nurtured. That's what we continue to build every day at Apex. Rebecca Lynn entered with an envelope. "Sir, these are letters from passengers. Stories of parents who now feel safe traveling with their children. Accounts from employees who say they finally feel respected. Some even mention that Flight 227 changed how they see themselves." Michael opened the letters, reading quietly. Tears formed but did not fall. Each note, each story, was a testament that the fight had transcended a single seat, a single confrontation. The human impact, intangible yet profound, was the true measure of success. In a quiet moment later that evening, Michael returned to his journal. His pen moved deliberately across the page. "Justice is not a gift we receive. It is a duty we owe. And this duty, no matter how difficult, must never be abandoned." He paused, reflecting on the long path from Flight 227 to now. The terminal lights flickered in the distance as he closed the journal. He knew challenges would continue. Some passengers, some employees, some competitors would resist. But the current had shifted irreversibly. The industry, the public, and the people who had once been silent now had a reference point, a standard set by action, by courage, and by integrity. Michael stood by the window, looking at the endless horizon. Beyond the city, planes soared into the night sky, carrying passengers who, thanks to the lessons of Seat 1A, would board with dignity, assured of their rightful place. He allowed himself a small smile. The revolution was quiet, measured, but unstoppable. It was no longer about a single seat. It was about a system transformed. And for the first time in years, Michael Lawson felt the weight of possibility not just for Apex Airlines, but for every institution and individual inspired by what had begun with courage, calm, and refusal to yield. The story of Michael Lawson and Seat 1A is a powerful reminder that dignity is not something granted by others. It is something we assert for ourselves. Too often, people are conditioned to compromise, step aside, or remain silent in the face of injustice. Yet real change begins when someone refuses to accept humiliation and instead channels their experience into action that benefits not only themselves, but the larger community. This narrative teaches us the value of courage tempered with calm. Michael did not yell, threaten, or seek revenge. He acted deliberately, with integrity and self-awareness, showing that standing up for oneself can also create systemic change. For older adults, the lesson resonates in both personal and professional life. True leadership is about protecting fairness, speaking truth, and empowering others to be heard. It also reminds us that power is most effective when used responsibly. Whether in family, community, or workplace, the ability to act decisively against inequity can ripple outward, influencing institutions, social norms, and future generations. Ultimately, this story encourages us to reclaim spaces where we belong, to confront prejudice with dignity, and to remember that justice is a practice, not a passive expectation. Thank you for watching and joining us on this powerful journey of courage and dignity. If Michael Lawson's story inspired you, please like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that uplift, challenge, and spark meaningful conversations.